Always fun to catch up with Gary Hess. The man wears so many hats. The only hat I know is busy, but the hat he's more proud of is family man and father. But the hat that I picked for this one was sports connoisseur. We talk about in-state moves from Virginia Commonwealth, Old Dominion, and much, much more. Gary Hess, a man of all trades, joined me on the Sports Buffet podcast. Always fun to catch up with Gary Hess. He has so many titles. I just call him busy. Gary, how are you? How are you today?
I am great. Happy Friday.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about something that is kind of, I don't want to say destroying Richmond, but the Colonial Athletic Association, I would say, is in trouble of becoming extinct, or at least as extinct as we know it. Give me your thoughts on some of the moves. First off, VCU to the A-10.
I think VCU to the Atlantic 10 is an interesting move on a lot of levels. I think anybody that tells you this is about anything but men's basketball is lying to you. It is a definite upgrade. I mean, the A-10 got 4 teams in the NCAA tournament last year. It is a move that is for the long-term, solid annual participation of VCU in the NCAA tournament. It is a move that makes a lot of sense. Financially, it's a move that only makes sense if they keep winning, because revenue sharing is tied to keeping more of what you get and not sharing with what the others get. There's more of that. So if the Rams can keep performing at the level that they are currently under Shaka Smart, it's going to be a great move. For some of the other sports, it's not an upgrade. I mean, the baseball is probably a little better than the CAA, some of the other sports as well. So, but make no mistake, men's basketball is the bell cow of VCU, and that is it's a positive move there.
For people who are not familiar with the revenue sharing, when VCU goes to the Final Four, kind of explain what happens to that money based on how you hear it.
Basically, they keep a percentage, and then the CAA gets a percentage, and then over the course of a period of years, 5 or 6 years, VCU gets a larger share of the revenue sharing because they have advanced in the NCAA tournament. And George Mason, their 2006 NCAA Final Four run, got them about, that is just coming to an end. And so, based on success of going through the NCAA tournament, your piece of the pie increases for a period of time. And so that's where the millions of dollars that VCU forfeits by leaving the CAA now, they leave some of that money on the table.
In terms of facilities, and really the only thing I've been to is the Siegel Center, but in terms of facilities, where does VCU rank in just, I don't know, maybe in terms of A-10, but how are they in terms of Colonial facilities?
In terms of Colonial facilities, I would say that in attendance, maybe in capacity, maybe not the biggest, but in atmosphere, it's bar none. I mean, there is nothing that tops a cram-full Siegel Center just rocking, and they sold out every home game this past season, and it was a home court advantage like none other. The Constant Center down at ODU is an excellent facility. They cram that thing full Siegel Center, and it absolutely rocks.
Do you think, too, that this move to the A-10 keeps Shaka there longer than he may have been, or does this have no impact on what Shaka Smart's going to do for his future?
Among a lot of people down here, Bob, there's a lot of disagreement over that. I'm of the opinion that it's not going to have any bearing on how long Shaka stays here. I think that it may be at a bigger level it could compare to some other jobs, but a VCU in the Atlantic 10 and a VCU in the CAA is going to have very similar status when an Illinois comes calling and offering $2.7 million a year. He's going to look at that job and that money and decide whether or not to leave VCU. And I don't think whether or not VCU's in the CAA or the Atlantic 10 is going to change that. Illinois wasn't a job that Shaka was interested in, but eventually there's going to be one. If he keeps performing at the level he has VCU performing at, eventually there's going to be a big dog that comes a knocking that's going to interest him. And no matter where VCU is on the conference radar, between the CAA and Atlantic 10, it's not going to change that.
What does this do for the VCU-Richmond rivalry?
I think it just means we get to see it twice a year instead of once a year. I think it's always a fun rivalry game. It's billed as the black and blue classic with the black from the VCU colors and the blue from the Richmond colors. And But now they're going to play twice a year, home and home, and it's going to mean more. I think it's going to ramp it up a little bit, but it was pretty good to start with. But getting to see that VCU Richmond game twice a year is going to be an extra added benefit for sure.
In general, do VCU and Richmond compete for the same kids in terms of recruiting battles, no matter the sport?
No, I would say not. Richmond, especially since Chris Mooney has come to Richmond with that Princeton-style offense, he looks for a specific kind of player. And there have been some instances with Richmond kids, especially over at Benedictine, where Richmond and VCU have both kind of gone after them, but not on a regular basis.
Talk about the other teams that have kind of bolted the CAA, and who else do you see bolting?
I think Georgia State was expected and there was no tear shed at the CAA. Georgia State was kind of geographically separated from the rest of the schools, and had made, when they were kind of, with Bill Curry coaching there, they kind of made no mistake. They were eventually looking at D1 football. So I don't think that was a big deal at all. Having said that, but the departure of Old Dominion hurts, as much as VCU does. Here's an interesting stat for you, Bob. When you look at men's basketball, since 2004, the CAA's had 14 NCAA tournament bids. 13 of the 14 have been garnered by VCU, Old Dominion, and George Mason. 13 of the 14 since 2004. And now 2 of those schools are leaving the league. So that hurts. There's just no other way to slice it. In terms of being a multi-bid league long-term, having said that, with George Mason staying, with Drexel in place and Bruiser Flint doing a great job there, and some other schools that could step up, and then other schools showing interest in joining the CAA, the CAA, from the standpoint of those of us here in Virginia, when there were 5 schools in the league, and they were just going strong, and they were kind of some of the top guys up in that league, I don't think that's going to be, the CAA is not going to be as prevalent and maybe not quite as good as it once was, but the CAA will survive and move forward.
Do you see George Mason having an interest in leaving, and what about JMU? Because, again, they have football, and I don't know, I've heard talk around here of, maybe a Liberty and Appalachian State of JMU. A lot of these guys that want to go maybe FBS or feel that's happening at some point, kind of forming a little bit of a conference where maybe they call it the WAC East, from what I hear.
I've heard that. I've also heard JMU maybe going D1 and trying to join the Mid-America Conference.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard some of that, and I believe that could happen down the road. I don't know that from a facility standpoint, football-wise, if you've been up to Harrisonburg, that football stadium's incredible. From a physical plant standpoint, they're ready to go D1.
Right.
But, I don't know if that's in the cards just yet financially up at JMU. We'll see. I do believe that's in the discussion phase right now. And probably those discussions are ramping up with VCU and Old Dominion leaving the Colonial at JMU. I certainly think Liberty's headed in that direction as well. You would know that better than I do. But I think some others may leave. It just time will tell. But I believe Tom Yeager had his hand on this a long time, the commissioner of the CAA, and I believe he will get the ship righted. There have been several schools that have reached out, and some of those names starting to trickle in. You hear Coastal Carolina, you hear College of Charleston, some of those kind of schools. So, the CAA will look different, but it'll still be. By the way, one other note, you mentioned about George Mason looking to go. My understanding, the CBSSports.com original report basically said Mason was ready to go, but they couldn't go to the A-10 because the A-10 didn't invite him.
Okay.
When it came down to the A-10 wanted an even number, when they lost Charlotte, they decided they wanted to stay at 14 for the time being. Butler had replaced Temple, and so then they chose to invite VCU over George Mason, not both. I think if Charlotte had stayed, they may have invited both of them to go to 16.
What does this do to non-revenue sports at some point down the road? Not just this, but, I can't imagine that Boston College really gets tickled of sending the softball team down to Miami to play either. In some of these bigger conferences. What does this do to non-revenue sports?
Well, I think when you look at Boston College and the ACC, I think that most of those schools have enough money coming in and are getting money from this new TV deal with ESPN at the ACC, where travel's an issue, but I do believe that you'll see less of that. I think you'll see some of these schools, and I think the ACC will go down this road again. I mean, they do it in football, but I think you'll see a little more embracing of the divisional concept in a lot of these leagues. I think you'll certainly see that in the new look Big East, which spans all the way to San Diego.
Right.
So I think the use of divisional concepts will help with travel, especially in the non-revenue sports.
Let's talk a little bit about Virginia Tech new hire, James Johnson, as the men's head basketball coach. A, did Seth get a raw deal? B, what type of hire do you think James Johnson is?
I don't think Seth got a raw deal at all. I think the change was necessary. I think you were looking at unprecedented change in the program. I mean, there were rumbles that Eric Green was going to leave. There were rumbles that several other existing players were going to leave. All the commitments were going to decommit. All the assistant coaches had left. With that kind of assistant coach turnover in the program is a red flag. And so, you deal with some of that stuff if you're going to the NCAA tournament every year. But 1 in 9 years, the biggest shock to me in all of that, Bob, was the timing. The fact that it was 5-6 weeks after the season, which hampered any kind of coaching search. Having said that, it would concern me if I was a Virginia Tech fan having a James Johnson, somebody who's never been a head coach before, coming in. The last time they brought in someone who'd never been a head coach before, it was Ricky Stokes, and we all know how that ended up. So, having said that, I'm not saying James Johnson won't succeed. I'm just saying it would concern me bringing in someone with no head coaching experience. And then with the money they paid him, there was clearly a financial aspect to this move as well. And, if you're going to pay in the neighborhood of $600,000, you're not going to get anyone with head coaching experience. Having said that, the addition of James Johnson saves the program in the short term in terms of keeping everyone there except for the one recruit. And Dorian Finney-Smith is leaving, but he was going to leave anyway.
Right.
But there were a lot of guys, one recruit and several players, including Eric Green, who may have left that stayed because Johnson was the guy. And so that saves the program in the short term. Now, can he sustain it in the long term? That's the unanswered question.
I agree with you. I think the timing was a little odd, but I think James Johnson, again, head coaching experience would worry me too if I was a Tech fan, but maybe he can bring some youthful energy is the best way I can put it. Who would have been on your short list, though, of guys to replace Seth?
Well, I would have liked to hear what Greg Marshall has to say out of Wichita State with his Virginia ties. I think that would have been, he's done well at Wichita State, did great at Winthrop before that. I think that's a guy I really would have wanted to talk to. According to, what I hear, they talked to, what's the guy's name at Villanova?
Not Jay Wright.
Yeah, Jay Wright.
Really?
I believe they spoke to Jay Wright. I believe they spoke to the guy at Murray State. So, they talked to some folks, but when push came to shove, James Johnson keeps the kind of the program intact, and he's cost effective. And, we'll see how that works. I would have gone to Greg Marshall and said, okay, what's it going to take? Everyone has a price. What's it going to take?
Right. I would have done the same thing. One of my sleeper picks might have been Mike Young down there at Wofford, because he's a Southwest Virginia guy too, and he's done a pretty good job with Wofford, which I know is a smaller school, but hey.
That's a great call. Yeah, he would have been a guy to talk to as well. Like, a lot of times these guys that coach in the Southern Conference go on to do very well
right
at higher levels. So, that I just would have Virginia Tech competing in the ACC. My personal preference would have been to see someone with some level of head coaching experience. If you're not going to pay, the $2 to $3 million to get a big name there, then go ahead and bring in. They could have brought in a Marshall for probably Tony Bennett money.
Yeah.
For Tony Bennett money, $1.7 million, they probably could have gotten Greg Marshall.
And I'm not trying to ruffle the feathers of Hokie fans, but I don't think that basketball job is as good of a job as they think it is.
I would agree with that. I would agree that I don't think it's a bad job, because there's no such thing as a bad ACC basketball job. I don't think it's a bad job, but I think saying it's not as good as Hokie fans think it is says more about what Hokie fans think than about the top.
I think it's definitely bottom half of the ACC, and I would say maybe even 9 or 10.
I would say bottom half. Yeah, certainly. I would agree with that because I would certainly say that obviously Duke, Carolina, NC State, Virginia has probably more history than Virginia Tech does. Maryland, Georgia Tech, certainly. So yeah, you get to the second half pretty quick.
Final thing.
And you know what?
Go ahead.
And you know what? Syracuse and Pittsburgh coming in is going to move them down 2 more spots because both of those are better basketball jobs than Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I would concur with that totally. Final thing for you, Gary. Always appreciate your time. In your opinion, we touched on this earlier with ODU, and they're making the move to play Division I football. How good can they be if they just kind of recruit the 757 leftovers, in your opinion? At some point down the road. I'm not saying they're going to play Notre Dame or anybody for a national title, but just in terms of relevance.
Well, I'm not going to underestimate Bobby Wilder in any way, shape, or form. 3 years, first year in the CAA, they go to the playoffs. He's built an amazing thing. There's a lot of talent in the 757, and they can take some leftovers from there, and maybe, compete at a little higher level now that they're at that D1 level, and then, reach out into North Carolina and up north, ways like he's done. I think they'll cast the net a little bit wider, but, he's brought in some guys, and guys have gotten better once they've gotten there. Player development is such a huge part of it, and that's, ODU appears to be doing that. And I would say that I have every expectation that they can, build a successful program at the Conference USA level and go play in bowl games. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Gary, as always, appreciate your time. If I don't see you before the next 10 months in March, I will talk to you soon. And as always, we appreciate it.
Take care. Keep Lynchburg safe, my man.
I'll try. I'll do the best I can. Gary Hess on the Sports Buffet.